Yes, from March this year I became the Deputy Secretary in charge of ICT infrastructure for the Department of Human Services. That's a bit of a mouthful, but basically it brings together the infrastructure from three big government agencies: Centrelink, the largest, Medicare Australia and Child Support. Look, the big impact on service delivery across all these agencies is the growing role of self-service. If you walk into a Centrelink office now around the country, if you've got a relatively straightforward thing, you'll be shown to the self-service, and this is changing the nature of service delivery. You know, we've been for a long time in government trying to use our staff to do the high value transactions. You know, there's no doubt about it that self-service gives us this increasing capability. Well, if you take the example of call centres in Centrelink, when it first started, we really started back in the 90s with no technology at all. And I'll tell you what, it was a difficult time. Then we saw the developments of soft phone and call routing. And they were the first sort of, you know, really big improvements in the way things were done. Back 4 or 5 years ago now, we introduced our first interactive voice self-service. We put some big applications up there. This just wasn't giving information. This was heavy lifting transactions, reporting your employment income. Quite difficult things to do. Again, this saw quite a significant change in the use, the way in which call centres work and what they did. And then, and now more recently, we're seeing a couple of interesting developments. One is the voice authentication technology, which I think we're really on the leading edge here. And I think now we have 150,000 voices recorded. What this does, it just so much simplifies people calling through. It reduces the time for them and the time for us in authenticating who they are. And another interesting one recently that came up, you know, of people coming to our offices who have a need for urgent money. You know, we now have a capacity called real-time growth settlement with the banks. And basically we do all this through a call centre operation now. So there's a whole lot of things that once required long and extensive face-to-face contacts, now done much simpler and easier using you know, both call centre technologies and better linkages with the banks and so on. So there's a lot going on. There's an issue that security can sometimes make them a little clumsy to use, and there'll always be some people who will struggle with them. In the case of voice authentication, for example, really it only works off the English language dictionary, so there's a big limit for a start. But nonetheless, there's a significant role they can play. The other one is that typical new technology one. You know, it's really like roadworks. There's always issues when you introduce it, but you know, if you ever want to drive on a 4-lane freeway, you've got to put up with a bit of roadworks, and that's a constant issue in the organisation all the time, pushing through on these new technology developments. Well, issues for customers in particular in Centrelink, it's you know, a lot of it's about waiting times, but I think that, you know, there's no doubt about it that what we're doing with self-service is contribute. The environment is quite different to what it was a few years ago. But the other one that's interesting too is about clear, precise communication from staff. And this is about giving your staff the right information, particularly in the, you know, we deal with very complex policy. And you know, there's a lot of technology support now required to make sure that our staff can give clear, precise and consistent information. On the IT side, what we aim to do is if we give them a good stable system that supports them what they do every day, and they have confidence in it, that does enormous things for their morale. If things get flaky, if they lack confidence in the system, if they don't know how to use it properly, they start to, and they see this themselves, they create rework, they create difficulty, and I think that it's very hard to keep morale up in those environments. So I think that's the IT contribution. Yes, there's issues about people in call centres, but I remember when this started back in the 90s, people said, well, a lot of staff don't only work in these places for a very short time because of the nature of the work and all that, but really hasn't proved to be the case. Most of the call centre people I meet in the course of getting round, this is their life, and they enjoy it. It's got its challenges, but it's got its rewards as well. Yes, I mean our call centre staff, I think, are just from my experience of going round to these centres there, there's a lot goes into creating the right sort of environment for them, and while there are ups and downs inevitably in organisations from time to time, I think now, having been in the business for 15 years or something, and still we bring in really good people. The thing about the call centres that they have been, I think, particularly successful with is the way they put a lot of effort into the new starters. You don't get on the phones until you're really able to answer, and do a good job. And they do that really well. They're very disciplined about it. Yeah, people do ask questions, and at times those questions are quite difficult, and there's a lot of nuances to them, and our staff have to make sure that they understand the whole picture. All this is part of their training. Also, too, the issuing of receipts, I think, gives people certainty as to that the transaction is complete in the way they want to do, and that's been a significant development over time. You do get, from time to time, people will have a particular query about the way that was handled, but in Centrelink all decisions are backed up by advice in writing, and of course having an office network to support things gives people another way of going in and making contact as well. Look, measuring performance in the e-channel is, well, there's so much information. The question is, what do you look at? Call centre too, the fact that people are on phones all the time, there's a lot of measures. I think that for many years you struggled to get the measures right. There's plenty of data. The thing is knowing what to focus on, getting the balance between completing the call and allowing the quality time and those sort of things. Constant struggle in organisations to get that balance right. I would argue now that we've got a lot of experience here, and we're able to push through on these things and get that balance correct. But it's a constant thing to work on. It's much harder in the face-to-face network, in the traditional network, to measure things. There's a lot happens in the interaction that but in these newer channels, the real issue is what you decide is really important from all the data that you have available. Voice authentication is the latest way. We've always had a way of authenticating people. For the online services, it's quite a formal process. We use secret questions, things like that, to ensure that the right person is using the automated systems. And call centre operator themselves will always have a little script they run through. So we put a fair bit into doing that. Our customer data in Centrelink and Medicare is a very important thing to us, the protection of that. The system controls around it, we would argue, are better than anywhere. We really put a lot in. We know exactly what all our staff are looking at. Amidst the millions of records that we hold, we can track what they're looking at, and we actively go looking for people who might be using or looking at records for which they don't have a business requirement to do. So you've got to do both of those, I think, in the modern age, you know, to give yourself a very high level of assurance that, you know, you actually you keep to the absolute minimum sort of inappropriate use of information. We first started on self-service with voice. At the time, I remember that it was only an afterthought, well, why don't we build a web product the same? Because web and voice to the IT people are just, it's only a difference in the top layer. They're the same thing. So because we could, we built a voice system to support a big, our first initiative in this area, and we built as a casual thing, really, a website. After all, they said they could use this thing called the web. And voice for the first couple of years remained the main form of automated response. But then we saw this huge surge in use of the web, and that has continued. But interestingly enough, voice never really dropped, and I think it's making something of a comeback. And particularly, I think we're getting better at crafting applications. And we're using them in particular in some niche areas where we're really seeing the value of voice. And I think there's a long way to go too. I think that, you know, these days so many people have mobiles, and really it's an area yet to be explored as to how we better communicate with those people. And then the other thing is, of course, how you link up voice and the web, because if you can do that well, you're going to get another big growth of people using these channels. It's a customer satisfaction is always the measure for service delivery. I mean, in government, it's really interesting whenever you go and listen to, you know, ministers and secretaries of departments retire. The thing they reflect on is the customer satisfaction, and it is the big measure. And I think that. You know, I know the Centrelink people look back over the last 10 years since the creation of Centrelink, and now with those levels sitting at sometimes over 90%, there's a huge sense of pride in the way the organisation. It's not overdone, but you know, there is a sense of pride of what's been achieved over a long time to be even able to attain those sort of levels in what's not an easy policy environment, you know. So customer satisfaction, it's measured. You know, there's a whole lot of process around the way it's done. It's very important that we be able to measure it consistently over time, but there's, you know, it does vary over time, but, you know, it's the key measure against which, for which we are accountable, and we report on in annual reports, and when we get into the Senate committees, guess what they ask about, you know. That's a very interesting question, and the answer to that is that what we see and what just about every other organisation is seeing is that a lot of people do both. A lot of people go to the web. They are therefore better informed when they ring up. I know there's a lot of, you know, you see this in international forums about the sort of what they call a lack of web stickiness. I love that term, which it's how you keep people in the web and on self-service. That is attracting quite a bit of attention. But having said that, someone who's been on the web, looked at all the information they need to see, if they're then narrowed the base of what they need to know to a simple inquiry that can be handled by someone with access to the system, then that's a better result for everybody. I mean, but it is, we do find that a lot of people who want to contact Centrelink will go to the web. They may go to the call. They may even come in. But you know, it's. I often think these channels are complementary as much as anything else. The change that's going on is that inside government is as much about. Whereas once you had a very clearly defined line between this is a call centre, this is an office, those roles are getting increasingly together. We're starting to see it as one resource, and the thing for us and the technology, we need to use them much more as a whole so that we can meet different peaks at different times. Is that's the thing that we'll push ahead with over the next few years. This is the issue. You've really got to have the big things we need to be able to use our staff as call centre people on the phones. We need to be able to use them in a face-to-face environment, but we also need them to be mobile as well. We need them to be able to send them to aged persons' homes, out into the community. We need them on the ground in disasters. This is the sort of new thing that's emerging. This sort of it's not a particular place that is one or the other. It's a resource that you develop as a flexible mobile resource.
I think that contact centres will certainly have a key role to play into the future in 10 years' time. There's a lot of transactions that are difficult to automate, but having said that, technology will play a big part of the future of the call centre environment. Not only are we looking at voice authentication, speaker verification technology to increase the number of customers who authenticate coming into our call centre environment, but to use self-service applications as part of that process. It means then, as John mentioned before, that a lot of the high-end transactions can be done by the contact centre agents. There's still that need to be able to speak to people. That's time and time again, our customers want to talk to people. That's one of the things that they do say. For more complex transactions, they're quite happy to use self-service technology if it's a more simple, regular transaction. The other technologies that we're looking at the moment, and I think will come into play in the next few years, are things like SMS, using SMS to do self-service transactions, where customers can actually operate and interact with technology to be able to find out information, for example, where their nearest office is, or update their earnings, those sorts of technologies. Also, I think cross-channel. So there's going to be really important for us to be able to have the IVR or phone channel, email, web chat, those sorts of technologies where contact centre agents will play a part of that. So, for example, in the future, contact centre agents could be doing some back-end type processes or work, answering emails or SMS contacts. So I think it'll be a more dynamic environment using those sorts of that sort of cross-channel technology. The other point is the increase in mobile phone technology. I think, as John pointed to as well, there's a lot more smartphones in use. The industry research shows that there's a huge take-up rate of smartphone technology. So how can we utilise that smartphone technology where people aren't necessarily going to be wanting to interact and do self-service or automated transactions at a PC sitting at home, but they may want to be out on the road or at school or at university or at work using their smartphone to do those transactions. So I think that's where it's heading. I certainly think there's still that place for contact centres into the future, and we certainly don't see that as being replaced. Centrelink certainly plays a really important role in providing a number of services, not only payment and customer service delivery, but also emergency response. And there's certainly a place for contact centres into the future.
Well, I actually I haven't always been in IT. I had quite long periods out in the service delivery network in Brisbane and Perth, and I came into the IT side not because I knew a lot about IT, but because at the time we were going to be rationalising data centres, and they said I was good at closing things. So I ended up in IT, and well, the thing about information technology in government, I think it's the most exciting place to work because it is so much at the front end, and particularly when you're working in organisations. I mean, in these organisations, IT is not just a support or enabler. It is so much in itself the delivery function. And so, its importance to these organisations is just, you just can't describe it. So when it works well, the organisations go well. Well, I personally always get a lot of value out of these things. One, there's a whole lot of ideas there, but it's a huge opportunity to catch up with other users of the technology. And as you'd imagine, we all exchange war stories. We comment on the vendors, and I'm sure they comment on us. And, but I think they're a very valuable part of the way in which you keep your organisation up to date. I think I always use these things to assure myself that we're not missing something that we should be working on. So it's a way in which I can assure myself that, by and large, the organisation's doing everything it can to, and within its budgets, of course, and all those other constraints on us. And, in the public sector, there's a whole lot of things you've got to be mindful of. But they do provide that sort of, clearinghouse for ideas, and I always learn something. I always bring back something. There's never a conference that I go to of this type that I don't come back and think, there's something there I need to take forward.